Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. Thanks for tuning in. I am so excited to introduce you today to Dr. Judith Joseph. Dr. Judith is a leading psychiatrist, researcher, and award-winning content creator dedicated to providing her patients and community with groundbreaking insights and practical tools to unlock a new world of mental wealth and personal growth. Dr. Judith, we are so thrilled to have you join us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course, so a lot to talk about. So tell us a little bit about, so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Well, I'm a board certified psychiatrist and I practice in Manhattan and I see patients that are anywhere from 4 to 90 years old. And I have a research lab where I do clinical studies, but I also have a small private practice where I see patients for therapy and medication management. And in addition to that, I started creating content based on what I was seeing in my lab. It went viral. I didn't think anyone would be interested in it. I thought, people aren't interested in research, but clearly they want to learn. I posted a reel and a TikTok on high functioning depression based on what I was seeing in my lab. And it was seen by over 20 million people around the world. And people were like, oh my gosh, that's me. How did you know? So I've really been on this mission to democratize mental health and to provide evidence-based information based on what I see in my practice and in my research, but making it really accessible to people because, if you've ever searched for a psychiatrist, there are parts of the country where there's one of me for 30,000 people. So,
yeah.
In order to really address this mental health crisis and the shortage of providers, I think that making this information available to the masses is really important.
Absolutely. And I love that. And it makes so much sense. And when you say that, people resonated with your video and your message, would you say, it was a specific population or, what types of people do you most commonly see?
Well, what I really see in terms of high functioning depression, it's not just high achievers. People think, oh, high functioning, you're this corporate person with gazillion dollars and running a high powered company. No, actually people who are high functioning, who push through pain, who push through obstacles every day to show up for others. That's like the working mom, that's like the single mom who's just trying to get everyone out the door, take care of her, career, making sure her kids show up, that's the student, the student who has so many exams, doesn't want to ask the parent for help, doesn't want to burden anyone. People who are like the educators, the teachers who are taking care of their students, but then also staying after work to make sure that their students understand and, are really grasping the information so they pass their exams. These are the people who are the strong ones, they show up for others, they're the rock, and they can very rarely show vulnerability because everyone's depending on them, but they're struggling inside. And they wear a mask of productivity because that is how they cope. They busy themselves, they push through pain. So I was surprised by the, variety of people in different industries, different ages, just different backgrounds that were saying that this resonated with them. And also, I was also surprised that it was people from all over the world, people saying, hey, I'm from, X part of Europe and that's me. People from parts of Asia, Africa saying, yeah, hey, I do that, I think it is the human experience because I think a lot of us feel like we can't let our guards down. We have to show up. And that's our coping mechanism. We busy ourselves through pain and discomfort because that's just how we know how to cope. We probably saw it in our parents. We saw it in our communities. Maybe it's not culturally acceptable to say things like I'm depressed. So you just, keep pushing through until something gives, right? Your body breaks down or you actually become clinically depressed and you can't function or or you cope with like substances or unhealthy behavior. So I think it's an experience that a lot of people can identify with and relate to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, can you describe for people who may not be as familiar with high functioning depression or hidden depression, kind of how you would distinguish that from, just being sad, right? Like, what does that look like? How would you describe it?
It's a really great question because we all experience sadness. That's a part of the human experience. But in my research lab, in order to meet criteria for major depressive disorder, which is clinical depression, you have to pull out this big Bible of psychiatry called the DSM-5, and then you go through the checklist and you have to meet 5 out of 9 criteria. So some of those are like guilt, poor concentration, low energy, um, not, getting good sleep, things like that. But you also have to meet criteria for significant sadness or something called anhedonia, which is a lack of interest and pleasure in things. The anhedonia is the part that people don't realize is actually a symptom that they're experiencing. It's like that meh, that blah, the lack of interest, like things don't excite you anymore. So that kind of gets snuck under the radar. But here's the thing, in order to meet criteria for a clinical depression, a major depressive disorder, the box has to be checked that you have a lack of functioning or significant impairment in functioning or significant distress. So what I was seeing was a lot of people who had symptoms of depression, but they were actually overfunctioning, right? Because that was their coping mechanism to be busy. Or they weren't identifying with their emotions. They weren't saying, I'm just distressed because maybe that wasn't a part of their cultural upbringing, or maybe there's people who just don't even acknowledge their symptoms. So these people will get missed by a clinician. If they go to a doctor and the doctor's trying to put them in a box of depression, they're not going to be diagnosed. A therapist will say, well, you don't meet criteria. And the interesting thing is that so many people reach out to me over DMs, over TikTok saying, my doctor said that there's nothing wrong with me because I'm still functioning. Or they said I don't meet criteria, but there's
Mm,
something off. I can't put my finger on it. And so I knew I was onto something, Why are we waiting for people to break down, to be in significant distress, to have crisis in order to address this? We can actually prevent this from happening. We can
sure.
prevent a mental health epidemic. And we don't have the providers. There's just not enough psychiatrists. There's not enough therapists. There's not enough mental health experts out there to meet this need. So let's try and prevent this depression. Let's prevent this substance abuse. Let's prevent this addiction to social media, these negative coping mechanisms that people are using to self-soothe something that they don't understand. And let's educate people. Let's democratize mental health and let them know that there's a name for this experience. And in my research, when you give a name to someone's experience, right, it's called affect labeling. You allow them to name the experience. That in itself decreases the amount of anxiety that they experience because
Sure.
they're like, well, finally, I know what this is.
Yeah,
There's nothing wrong with me. It's not like there's this unknown entity. I know it now, and now I can do something about it.
sure. And somebody sees it.
And someone sees it. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because many times it's like an invisible
Yeah.
condition, right? Like, things that we experience because you can't see them. It's not like someone who's having an asthma attack, they're gasping for air, and you're like, oh my gosh, someone get this person help. When someone's struggling in silence and they have these symptoms that they don't understand and they appear high functioning, they're not going to get help, support, empathy. In fact, they feel as if they're a burden. They feel like when they ask for help that they're burdening others. But if they only knew that feeling guilt and feeling like you're a burden, if they only knew that's a symptom of depression, they would be like, well, this is a symptom. That's why I don't
Mm,
want to ask for help. That's why I feel guilty when others help me. That's why I feel less than. So I think it's important to allow this information to be put out there so people can not necessarily self-diagnose, but self-recognize that this is something that they could potentially get help for and then prevent this from worsening.
yeah, and I love what you said too. I think it is a very common, especially for our audience of high achieving women, for their symptoms to be dismissed,
Mhm.
especially in the general practice setting. As well, you're a middle-aged woman, it's perimenopause, or well, you're a mom, and so it's very easy to sort of attribute or chalk up those symptoms to life, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, like we as women push through pain as it's a part of the experience. From the time we start menstruating, it's like, well, everyone goes through this. So like, what's the big deal?
Right.
And I just remember some of like my siblings having like the worst cramps and then just like couldn't go to school. And like you go to school the next day and it's like, really? You didn't come to school because of your period? And it was like this stigma. But when we see these like Instagram memes of like men putting this period stimulator on and the cramp stimulator, and they're like rolling on the floor and
Right.
they're just
I
like,
can't stand up.
yelling. It's like, yeah, it's validating because
Yeah.
sometimes the period will stop you. Sometimes
True.
you can't go to school. Sometimes you
True.
can't go to work. But we're just told like, well, all women go through it. So like, what's your problem? And
Yeah.
it's just very unfair. And it's the same for postpartum depression. Like I'm right now conducting a clinical study on postpartum depression, looking at novel medications for it because, thus far there's only one FDA approved medication for something that has gone on since the beginning of the time, right? For us as humans,
Hmm.
which is really scary to think about. But,
Hmm.
we're told, okay, well, so what? Mothers give birth and you're not the first to do it. Like, oh, or like my mom had 5 kids and you're complaining with one. But, we know now that like physiologically, that there are hormonal changes that happen in the body and brain, that some mothers experience things like mastitis, which is like, infections in breastfeeding. And then, some of us have C-sections and we have to get through that. Some of us can't even poop after we give birth. Like these are really tough things. And there's this little being, sometimes more than one if we have multiples,
Yeah.
right? That depends on us. And then we're just told, well, you're supposed to look thin right afterwards. You're supposed to look like you enjoy being a mother. You're supposed to get through it when all of these things are happening to our bodies and brains. And it's really a form of gaslighting for women. So, yeah, we are the pros in pushing through pain. And there's no wonder that, women are twice as likely to have depression and anxiety than men
Sure.
because all these things happen to us and we're told we're supposed to just deal with it because women go through this. And then not to mention menopause, which just hits many of us like a ton of bricks because most physicians, and I know I went to medical school and I got maybe one course on menopause, and women spend like about, a significant portion of their lives, like 2/3 of their lives postmenopausal. So like, why are we not addressing this? Why do we know so little about something that all people who have ovaries will eventually go through? Why does this happen? It's just really appalling. And that's why I think having this information available and having support in community and talking about it openly without shame is important. Like for me, it warms my heart when I hear women saying, like, yeah, like I couldn't sleep last night. I guess it's perimenopause, or like, my ears are itching and things are happening to my body. Well, I guess it's perimenopause. It's like we need to talk about it. We need to support each other because really the providers don't know. The professionals are just know so little. And we have to take it on ourselves again to educate ourselves so that we know it's not in our heads, that this is happening to us, this is real, and we need support.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're putting that truth out into the world because the reality is I've never been a huge fan of social media, but one of the things I learned as I started my business is there's a huge number of credible experts like yourself who are using it as a platform to educate, right? And I think that's the most powerful tool for people to consume information, right, from credible experts, and to be more informed, whether it's about mental health, whether it's about menopause, right? And there's less stigma around all of those things now as well. Although I still think we have a ways to go.
Yes, there's definitely still stigma. And I think stigma will always exist, but I think like what is changing is that people are more open,
Yeah,
and the more we talk about it, eventually, there'll just still be those pockets of stigma, but the majority of people will accept it. Um, and yeah, I agree. There may be a fair bit of like overdiagnosis online, and there's nothing wrong with people sharing their stories. But when you're not, trained in a certain area and like you haven't seen the treatment successes, the treatment failures, you haven't worked in teams, and you're making blanket statements about, your one experience and applying it to everyone, that's dangerous. But I do think that there's a place for stories. Like people sharing their stories is very effective. A lot of times you hear health professionals talking and you just zone out because it's boring. You're like, what are they talking about? They're using big words. So having, real stories of people who've experienced what they've experienced and gone through it and had, you know, failures in their own lives, that's very powerful.
yeah,
And I do agree that we need more healthcare professionals online who are
yeah,
credible, but
yeah.
they also need help. They need support and they need to know how to do it properly, because if you're reading a journal article and no one cares about what you're saying, then that information is just getting lost.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, because I do think it affects a significant portion of the high functioning women that are listening and that, I talk to and work with. And specifically, we know the obvious, quote unquote, and more common coping mechanisms, right? Like substance abuse, drinking, drugs, eating. We don't talk as much about overfunctioning or busyness as a coping mechanism. And I would love your take on that, and specifically how unresolved trauma can play a role in that.
Well, one of the symptoms in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what people think PTSD or trauma responses like PTSD only happen in like combat veterans, but we now know that that's not the case. If you've been through something painful in your life, and let's say like an abusive relationship or a medical trauma, you can go through things like avoidance, like not wanting to think about it, not wanting to deal with the trauma because you don't want to be reminded. It causes too much physiological unrest or like causes you to go into fight or flight. And so one of the ways that you avoid trauma is by busying yourself. If you're too busy to sit and sit still and think about something painful, then that's your trauma response, right? I see this a lot. And I see this fear of slowing down, that if you, take the time to just sit, think about things, there's this real fear that people have, unconscious or conscious, that they'll just break down, like, so they busy themselves.
Yeah.
They just keep going, going, going. I see this a lot with moms, it's like, some of the people I've treated who've gone through terrible divorces and financial traumas, and they're on their own. They don't want to slow down because they're afraid that, what if I slow down? What if I break down? My kids need me, or I'll lose my job. So they just push, push, push. And then before they know it, they have like high blood pressure, diabetes. They haven't been taking care of themselves. And they're like, where did the time go?
Mm-hmm.
How did this happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
But, there's a real gift in slowing down. Yes, you may slow down and you may cry. You may, start to feel depressed, but you start to feel again. You start to process that trauma. You start to process those emotions. You start to reflect on, well, how have I been maybe dealing with this in an unhealthy way? How have I been coping in unhealthy ways? And then you start to develop, hopefully, skills that are more adaptive, that actually help you to process trauma in ways that are sustainable. One of the things that I use with my clients is um, mindfulness, but different types of mindfulness that are newer in existence, like metacognition, where they're not, trying to change their thoughts. They're actually trying to live with that thought and say, like, okay, these things happen. I do worry, but let me process this in a healthy way and learn how to live alongside my worries so that my worries don't dominate me, so that my worries don't make me do, right? Like, so my worries are just there in the background, but I'm still taking care of myself. And some of my clients just hold so much of their trauma in their bodies that they don't realize how that certain pain is related to just being tense all the time. So some of them need a lot of body work, a lot of movement work, because they're able to release some of that through these more tangible, more physical ways of getting this stress out. Everyone's different, others are just not ready to talk yet. So we focus on more of the behaviors, like, well, maybe don't say yes to that project at work because maybe you don't have to prove yourself. Maybe you have guilt for being late because you had to take your kid to the doctor, but you don't have to say yes to that project and then make yourself even more burdened, like, so a lot of intention in the decisions that you're making. So that's, everyone's different, but
Mm-hmm.
the bottom line is that, the busying themselves in these ways is detrimental to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this in children. They're busying themselves online. They're excessively consuming social media, and they can't, when they take a break from the tablet or the device, they just get restless and irritable. So what I find is that when I'm treating the head of the household, be it the mom or dad or whoever is the leader in the household, when you work with them to slow the busyness down, you see it being slowed in all of the family unit. You see the child slowing down too. So because mom isn't on her computer, and during dinner, the kid isn't on his device. Everyone's slowing down, everyone's being intentional, everyone's being more
Mm.
present. And so that's why it's important to address this, because it is contagious. This busyness is contagious. This high function depression is contagious. This anhedonia is contagious in the same way that positive behaviors can be contagious. So, I work with my clients in different ways.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I love to hear you say, think about that ripple effect. If you're a parent, how those behaviors are serving you, how they're not serving you, but then how are they impacting those around you, and most importantly, your family. So I think
Yes.
that's such great advice. And I know you mentioned your happiness lab, and you talk a lot about the science of happiness. So I would love to, if you could expand upon that a little bit.
Well, I've developed a system called the 5 V's. And what I found is that we all have this idea that whatever it is, if I ask my patients, my clients to imagine what happiness is, some of them will imagine, like finally finishing their medical school and getting, like a job and making a lot of money. And then some of them will imagine finally finding a partner that gets them and then starting a family. Others, it's like maintaining a certain amount of success as an entrepreneur. But then what I found is that, and what the research shows is that when you have these ideas of happiness and you're living for the future of happiness, you end up, once you get those goals, you're still searching. You're still, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, now I want this and now I want that. And I've experienced that too. Like for me, it was when I finally graduate medical school, when I finally get this position, when I finally get this marriage, when I finally get this house, but then I had to have a baby and then, more, it's just like so much. And I was also down that path, which led me to reflect on my own personal experiences with high functioning depression, like just pushing through and not really being present. So the 5 V's is about finding points of happiness in the now. How do you find happiness today? Because tomorrow really isn't promised. And the first one is validation. So many of us, we don't acknowledge how we feel because we push through our pain. So first, I want you to be real with yourself and start acknowledging your feelings. Many people with high functioning depression experience something called alexithymia, where they don't know how they feel. So sometimes, in my book, I'll mention like there's this list of emotions. So I want people to start getting familiar with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I treat children and adults. So with the children I treat, there's a face chart that we use to identify emotions. But sometimes I use that same face chart in my adult patients because they forget what, the range of emotions that they're capable of. They're binary at times, sad or happy, right? But no, there are other things. And the reason that's important is because we now know from science that happiness is not just one feeling. It is a plethora of sensations. So like when you're feeling tired, getting rest. When you're feeling thirsty, drinking water, like feeling quenched. When you're feeling lonely, being connected. These are the points that make up happiness, right? It's not just one idea. So it's a real reframe for people. So it's important to, number one, validate how you feel, but many people have a hard time just even naming an emotion. So we work on that first. The second is expressing how you feel, venting. And venting can be to a therapist, it could be to a faith leader, it could be to a friend, a family member, it could be to yourself, like just saying it out loud in a mirror. It could be writing in a journal. And for me, I vent. If I'm feeling a certain way, I'll make like a meme or I'll post on social media and I express it that way. But it could be creative. You can vent through, your singing or artistic expression, like drawing. And then third is values. So what really gives you purpose in life? What really gives you meaning in life? And be real with this, because a lot of times people think that, oh, like I value money or I value success or accolades. But at the end of the day, if you were to be on your deathbed, what would you do? Like if you could wish for 5 more minutes of something, what would you be doing? And I bet it wouldn't be, well, I just need, 5 more minutes. I wish I had gotten a degree or something like that. Most people won't say that. They'll say things like, I wish I had more time with the ones I loved. I wish I spent more time doing the things I really like enjoyed. And so sometimes I have to really re-educate people about what their true values are because they get lost along the way. And in my book, I talk about how you can identify that. I was at a conference recently And I was having a discussion with a woman who said, I don't know what I value anymore. So, I just briefly went over an exercise with her to try and figure out, where along the way did she lose herself? And it turns out she couldn't remember parts of her childhood because she had blocked it out. And there was an unresolved trauma that had gotten in the way of her really staying connected to what she really valued. And then the next V is vital. So these are things that edify your body and brain, that really support the only body you will ever have, the vehicle that carries you through life, that we neglect and many times treat poorly. So for me, the area that I wish that I was better at is sleep. I wish that I could really work on my sleep a bit more. But sleeping better, eating foods that feed your brain. 6 years ago, I shifted my diet and I started eating fish every day, and it's really changed my memory. I feel better. I feel less um, achy in terms of like eating anti-inflammatory foods. I eat blueberries every day. So really feeding your brain with anti-inflammatory and brain healthy foods, getting movement in. I'm very intentional about working out as often as possible because it makes me feel happy. Even on days when I don't want to, I get some movement in. And then really having a healthier technology relationship. So part of the vitals that I think doctors are going to start asking about more is like, how much time do you spend on screens? Because we know that that's not healthy for developing brains, and it's not healthy for adults either. And then a part of vitals that I ask about as a therapist, and I include in my book, is your relationships, because the number one predictor of your longevity is the quality of your relationships. And then the last V is vision. What are you celebrating? What are you looking forward to? Many times, people who push through pain don't acknowledge their wins. So I really teach people to celebrate their small wins. It doesn't have to be grand. It could be getting your kid to school on time. It could be getting one thing done for that day. It could be making your bed, or just doing one thing on your to-do list, but also planning moments in the future to celebrate with the values that you actually love. So it's carving out that time and being intentional about how much time you spend in the future, so that you keep moving forward. You have things to look forward to in the future to move forward instead of being stuck in the past. So these 5 V's are based on evidence-based research, based on positive psychology and elements of cultural psychiatry. And in my book, I talk about how different cultures do this, you can make this really, and basically honoring your ancestors. I talk about parts of Europe, Asia, Africa, how we all have the 5 V's within our cultural language. We just forgot about it. Mental health has always been a part of our history, but we just forgot about it, and how we can honor ourselves and celebrate ourselves by taking care of our mental health.
Absolutely. Such a powerful framework. And I know you do have a book that is launching in March of 2025 called High Functioning. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's now April.
April
20.
2025.
Yes.
Which we can pre-order now. So is there anything else you'd like people to know about your book? And also, where can they pre-order it?
You can pre-order the book on my website, anywhere that books are sold. It's sold in audio and hardcover. The hardcovers are really what I'm promoting, because there are grids in there. There are tools in there that you can use for yourself, for your family members. There's something in there for every age. I am a psychiatrist that treats all age groups and all generations. And I do have pre-order bonuses. So if you pre-order, there are bonuses that you can get. There are audio sound bites from world-renowned experts that all have gone through high-functioning periods where they weren't acknowledging their pain, and they talk about how they got through it. And then I also have these virtual and in-person meetups in my happiness lab. So we recently had a bunch of high school students roll through the lab, and they learned about the 5 V's in real time. We're having adult meetups. We're taking the happiness lab on the road, so that you're not just watching something or reading something. You're actually learning how to practice it and utilize it in your day-to-day life. And it hopefully tailors to the science of your happiness. And that's what it's called, the Science of Your Happiness Lab, because we know that everyone has their own roadmap. So we're trying to help people to come up with these individualized plans so they have sustainable happiness.
Love that. Love that. And so speaking of happiness, we talk about success on this podcast and redefining success. And so I would love to know, from your perspective, how do you define success?
Well, in 2020, I was sitting at my computer in my lab, like I am right now, and that's the horns outside because it's New York City.
Welcome to
But
New York.
right, but I was giving a talk to a major hospital system and really helping people navigate feelings of fears and anxiety because of the unknown of the pandemic. And I found myself struggling with this feeling of blah, numbing. And I was like, halfway through the talk, I was like, I think I'm depressed. And it was like a realization for me. And I'm a board certified psychiatrist. I have like degrees from Columbia, Duke. I just was shocked. I was like, how did I not know I was depressed? It kind of snuck up on me. So I had to really redefine my own happiness because I had just
Wow.
gotten into this prestigious group of women who were, it's a women collaborative at Columbia University where I went to medical school. And I'm chair of women in medicine there. And I just gotten I was getting all these press interviews and I was getting all these accolades and I just felt like numb. I was like, okay, what's next? What's next? And anhedonia stuck up on me. And so I had to really change the way that I approached life because I had all the things on my checklist. I had the marriage, had the kid, had the house, had the lab, had the successful career, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I wasn't feeling a sense of purpose. And I was just feeling blah. And I had to reframe because I wasn't really taking care of myself using the 5 E's. And that's why I ended up developing this because I think this can happen to anyone. Like I mentioned, not just people who are high achieving on paper,
Sure.
people who just push through pain to show up for others. We just neglect ourselves. We just, you know, don't even validate our own experiences as humans. So I really wanted to get back to the basics and make something that was accessible to everyone, so that we all have the possibility to achieve this, this happiness that is individualized. And that's why I have these experiences called the science of your happiness, because I really do believe that we all have the roadmap within. We just need help finding it.
Amazing. And I think thank you for sharing your story. I think it is so relatable. And I think to your point, when we can be vulnerable and share our experience, it can help others through their own journey. And so, so many women can relate to that. In the work I do, I refer to it as the arrival fallacy, right? Chasing after that next goal, that milestone, you get there. And then you're not celebrating the win. You're thinking about, okay, what's next, right? Thinking that that's going to bring you satisfaction, fulfillment, happiness, but it doesn't. And so I think, if you find yourself getting trapped in that cycle, kind of pausing and asking yourself, what is it you're striving for? What is it we're seeking? What is it we're trying to prove? Right.
Yeah, and also there's like how to reflect and find that time in life when you were actually feeling fulfilled and purposeful.
Hmm.
And I remembered it was back when I was with my siblings. My dad is a pastor and we grew up in the church, and he would pull us on stage and we do these skits. And so I had to be like, okay, let me try doing that again. And I did that. I started doing skits on social media and teaching about mental health, and it just took off. So really, when you do invest
Mm,
in what you truly value, it may not
sure.
lead to any money, but
Sure.
it does, like, that wealth of happiness is worth more than anything. So
Yeah.
that's what you really need to reflect on and try to find what you valued in life and how did you get lost along the way. But you can find yourself back there. You just have to do some self-reflection and some work.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you would like to tell our listeners? One thing you'd like them to think about doing differently or changing after listening to today's episode?
I think whenever I speak with people out when I'm doing public talks and speaking engagements, they're always like, well, how do I get back to that? I just really need help. I encourage them to take my anhedonia quiz. It's on my website and it's free. And try to find the points where you're really lacking pleasure. I think we tend to, when you answer the quiz and you find things that you are still enjoying, people tend to just keep doing more of those things. That's important, but also look at the things that you stopped enjoying and consider re-engaging in that. So one of the questions on the quiz is like I don't enjoy being as intimate with my partner anymore. So like you don't have to full on get into it with your partner, but one of the things you can do is test the waters is, just gently like cuddling with them or just rubbing the small of their back or doing something where you're basically exposing yourself to the idea of doing the thing again, right? If it's art, and some people used to like going to museums and looking at art, you don't have to go to like the MoMA. You don't have to go to like a Planet Day at the museum, but just try like looking up art on your phone, like try to engage in things that you used to enjoy slowly. Because I think we tend to do what we're good at or want to keep doing what we already have because it makes us feel good, but gently exposing yourself to the things that you once enjoyed will actually retrain your brain that you can enjoy them again. And that's one of the things I encourage as a first step.
Such great advice. I love that. And Dr. Judith, where can our listeners learn more about you, the work that you do, and take the quiz?
drjudithjoseph.com. And you can follow me on all socials at Dr. Judith Joseph. The only one that I'm not at Dr. Judith Joseph on is Facebook. So that one is Dr. Judith Joseph MD MBA. I don't know what I was thinking with that, but you can find me if you Google me, Dr. Judith Joseph.
Amazing. I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights, your story, and your expertise. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram at gialacqua. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.